Thank you for joining us today. Here today, we're going to talk about CBRS. We've talked about this before, and we're going to continue to talk about what's happening, kind of the landscape, what we have to offer in terms of solutions. I also have with me today a couple of guests, Lucia from Cambium Networks. She is our fellow who is very, very much an expert in CBRS and all things CBRS, and she'll talk about a lot about what's happening in the future. What are they implementing going forward in the CBRS space? And then I also have Josh from Zirkle, operations manager over there. He's going to talk about his experience with his network. He's out in Colorado, as you may see from the background there. But he's going to kind of share his experience so far with CBRS and where they're headed. So without further ado, let's get going. And please raise hands, ask questions in the chat. If you do have any, we can pause during the presentation if we find it fits in well. If not, I'll answer them at the end, and there will be plenty of time for questions. So let's get going. I think most of you know who we are that are online today. But at a glance, Cambium Networks, we're really about the wireless fabric, about all things wireless, from very close range to long distances for point to point. Anything wireless, we have a solution for. The portfolio keeps getting broader and broader. It's a very solid company. We went IPO last year, and things are doing fairly well lately, especially with the need for intense upgrades in networks. More people are working from home due to the COVID pandemic. Lots of things going our way right now, and CBRS kind of filtered right in there timeline-wise. And so we feel we have a very strong solution portfolio to meet all those wireless needs that are arising. Applications are all over the place, right? We do defense, we do federal applications, but our main bread and butter, and the reason we're talking today, a lot of these apply in the CBRS band. There is quite a few solutions that relate to CBRS or can take advantage of CBRS as a part of the solution. This is kind of a picture of our wireless fabric and what we're calling now gigabit wireless fabric. We recently launched the 60 gigahertz band of product, the CN Wave product. There's been a lot of talk about that. And if you're interested in that, stay tuned. There's upcoming webinars. There's lots of training that's been released. There's prior webinars you can go look at on our forum. But certainly that's a very exciting addition to the portfolio, providing multi-gigabit service in close range, of course, but providing that high level of service, especially in the US where a lot of it is unlicensed. There's several channels available, huge amounts of bandwidth that can be transported. But again, today we're talking specifically about CBRS. And really, it's all about the management. With Cambium, really, we're envisioning something that Maestro kind of controls, manages. Our network management tool called CN Maestro is an overarching single pane of glass that kind of manages everything. And it allows you to view, monitor, configure, upgrade software, all the various functions that it does. And in addition, the very important module that is part of Maestro is the domain proxy for CBRS. So we can talk about that in a little bit as well. And really, why Cambium versus anything else that has a solution? It's all about the heritage. It's purpose-built fixed wireless. That's what we do. It's a proven winner, right? We have this product portfolio, and it really just works. You can see kind of the extremes that some of our equipment goes through and continues to function. So let's zero in on CBRS a little bit and talk about the market solutions for that specific use case. Right here, I'm just showing kind of, you got your point of presence. Usually you have kind of a microwave link that links that point of presence to something a little bit closer to the distribution or the access layer. And now we're looking at multi-point distribution from that sense, whether it's business, enterprise, or residential. You can utilize the CBRS band and the CBRS solution for those multi-point access type of deployments, that part of your network. And why CBRS? What does it mean? In a nutshell, it's dynamic spectrum sharing. And really, it's not just FCC and the US. It is today, but tomorrow, and possibly next year, it's going to be applied in different places, different spectrum. Really, it's a tiered, in this case, it's a tiered approach, and we're protecting many classes of users. The idea is to best share that spectrum. It's a limited amount of spectrum, right? In the past, it was 50 megahertz. Now it's a little more, but the goal is to dynamically share and protect incumbent users and the Department of Defense in this case. But really, it's about doing that dynamically and allows sharing unused portions while mitigating interference or minimizing interference caused by users of the spectrum. CBRS itself is a little bit complex. We know that it's a little bit tricky to use. There are some good things about it in the fact that it's a 3 gigahertz band. So it penetrates, it's got better propagation characteristics than the higher frequencies. So it can go farther. You can have better range and coverage. It also allows higher EIRP. This means that the higher power is able to also penetrate further, better coverage again. The spectrum's actively managed, and that will get better over time. Right now, it's assigning channels, but it's not doing too much in the way of interference management or mitigation. But it can, and it will going forward. It's protecting the incumbents. That's the key piece that the Department of Defense really wanted to have in place before they released this spectrum. And then there's the PALs, and we'll talk in more detail about the licenses, the priority access licenses that have been auctioned off. Now, things against it, it costs a little bit of money to use. Every subscriber you put out there has a associated ongoing cost with it. And that's because we're pinging this dynamic database that helps manage the spectrum. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of use cases that are yet to be seen. They dubbed this the innovation band. So there's a lot of new use cases that folks are trying to come up with. How do we best use this spectrum? What are the cool things we can do with this spectrum? So it's getting some, in the mainstream media, getting some hype around it, and things are happening that are attracting people to the band. That just means there's more traffic. So it could cause congestion over time. Equipment's a little bit more expensive, the filtering, all the specialized parts that go into it. It is part of the standard in many places. Now we have band 48, TD-LTE band 48, that's defined. So costs should be coming down, but it is a little bit more expensive to build things in this band. And LTE is kind of what everyone talks about when they talk about CBRS, but it's not the only solution. As you probably know, our 450 solution is not LTE, and it's the predominant solution in the band today. And the rules are complex, and we'll get into a little bit more of that. But we do expect that in the future, other countries and other spectrums will adopt this sort of model. So keep in mind, this is the first time it's becoming successful. It's not without peril, it's not without complexity, but it's becoming successful in the US, and we do expect to see this adopted in other places. So in the past, this slide I think you've seen before, the typical triangle slide, but let me walk through it very quickly. In the past, you had 50 megahertz, and that was the yellow bar on the left side there. That was under the 365 Part 90 rules. Now we have 150 megahertz to play with, but we have this tiered use, and that's the center triangle. So general authorized access, GAA, used by many people. Anyone who gets in the band can use that. That will remain up to 80 or at 80 megahertz of spectrum in the band at every location, but could be as much as all 150. The priority access licenses were auctioned off, and in most counties, all 7 channels, they were 10 megahertz channels, all 7 were auctioned off. And so their PAL users will begin to enter the band very shortly here, probably in about a month and a half time frame. And then there's always incumbent users. Coastal areas are protected for naval radar. There's fixed satellite stations throughout the country. There's quiet zones for satellites and radars that are pointing up into space. So there are some areas of the country where it's unusable because incumbents are owning that. And then, as I mentioned, the band 48 has been defined. So a little bit more detail. Again, the PAL auctions just happened. Lots more to come on that, and we will probably have a few webinars specifically on that topic in conjunction with our partners. I know Federated's been doing webinars with other folks, and we'll probably have one with them shortly to talk about that in more detail. But PALs are an increasingly interesting aspect to this because they're just starting to get implemented. And even those of you who have not participated, did not participate in the PAL auction, should be aware of what's going on because it may cause some movement in the spectrum that you're currently using. So it is worth paying attention to. The GPWZ, the grandfather protection wireless zones, if you filed ahead of time by April of 2015, you're protected for that upper 50, but that has gone away if your license has expired for Part 90, and 85% or so of the licenses have expired as of October 17th. So there's a lot of things happening right now that's kind of changing the landscape within CBRS. And if you didn't participate in the PAL and you want to get into that game or want to have some access to some licenses, there is a secondary market, and we'll probably touch on that a little bit more, and we can ask questions about that as well. So what has Cambium got going here in terms of the solution itself? Well, we work with all three of the major SaaS providers. There are a couple others that exist, but the major three are Federated Wireless, Google, and CommScope. We offer our customers, if you choose to use CBRS, you then sign up through CN Maestro. The business relationship is through Cambium Networks, and you choose one of those three SaaS administrators to work with. But you're working through Cambium. So you can choose any of the three, but you're working through Cambium. We bill you directly for the fees that are associated. And the other main point of this slide is that all of the 450 equipment, going all the way back to the original 450 access point, all of it is compatible with both Part 90 and Part 96, meaning if you have a Part 90 deployment and you're looking, hey, what do I do with this? We've tried to warn you ahead of time, but most likely your Part 90 license has expired. If you have a waiver, that's great. If you have an expiration date that's beyond the October 17th deadline, that's also great, and you can continue to use Part 90, but be aware that at some point you're going to need to migrate over to Part 96, and you can do that with any of the 450 equipment. So it's great news, and we're very pleased to have that in the portfolio, that all of the equipment that's in 365 can be migrated to Part 96. We've left nothing on the floor. Nothing is restricted in any way. It's all able to move over. The best thing about this portfolio, however, is the Medusa product. CN Medusa is a technology that we've implemented within the portfolio that allows us to do massive multi-user MIMO. And this is great because it provides extreme capacities in a single, nice, self-contained, simple device. It is big, it is heavy, but it's providing you this 90-degree sector that's able to achieve huge amounts of capacity in a single channel. We do support up to 40 megahertz channels. Most of our customers use 20 or 30, depending on what they have available to them. But it's a great solution for this band. You can provide access to many customers. We can support up to 238 subscribers per sector. And we've seen results that are exceeding 400, 500 megabits in a single sector. It is pretty amazing. And the performance from a near line of sight, non-line of sight characteristics has been very good. And in fact, it outperforms most of what we're seeing even in using LTE. So it's look for some more details to come on that from us. We have a couple of papers out there now. We're going to produce a couple more with some more details around why we believe that's happening. And it's a good news story. On the subscriber end, we recently released the 450B high gain device. It has an integrated dish. It's a feed horn. The radio is actually in that feed horn, and it provides nice long coverage, big coverage for you. And gets to just about the EIRP maximum of the band, which is something that is very important and is a huge competitive advantage when you compare to what's available in the LTE world. This device really provides that balanced link and the ability to do much more throughput in the uplink. A lot of times with LTE, and I talk a little bit about LTE because that seems to be the predominant marketing around this band is LTE. But this device provides much more capacity in the uplink, much more power, EIRP, and it provides that balanced link. So you can do whatever you want with this network from a duty cycle standpoint, rather than be very constrained on the uplink. And it'll help you meet those requirements for CAF2 and perhaps even for RDOF when you get down to that level. Reuses the same 30-volt power scheme as the existing subscriber modules. So with that, that's kind of our nutshell portfolio overview. And now I'd like to introduce Josh from Zirkle. Zirkle is one of our longtime customers, and they embarked on the CBRS journey not too long ago. And I'd like to invite Josh to go ahead and talk to this. Josh, are you there?
Yep. Thank you, Matt.
Right. No problem.
I do want to start off by just saying thank you to Matt and the Cambium team for having me here today to talk about our experience with CBRS. It's been an enlightening experience, as Matt alluded to earlier, not without some struggles along the way. But it's been a really great addition to our network, and our team has kind of jumped in with both feet in a lot of respect. And so if you want to go ahead and switch to the next slide, Matt.
Sure thing.
So a little bit of background about Zirkle. We are located in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, so the northwest corner of Colorado. We have a coverage area of about 1,500 square miles. We've got approximately 26 tower sites spread across the landscape. As the slide mentions, it is a very mountainous and forested terrain. Most of our tower sites are sitting on the top of a mountain of some fashion. We do have a handful of tower sites that are lower, but to get a lot of coverage out to where we need it, we've typically gone pretty high up in the air. We started in 2001. We did switch over to be essentially a Cambium only network in 2006. And we started deploying 3 gig equipment, primarily. We actually started with Telrad in 2014 with the LTE, but the complexity of the equipment essentially drove us over to the Cambium platform. I know in one situation, the next slide has I believe a picture of one of our tower sites, and it's that particular tower site that had a lightning strike that took down one of our Telrad pieces of equipment. And we were never able to get that to get that access point back up and operational. We replaced the access point. We did everything in our power, and we were not able to get it up and going. So at that point in time, we just started ripping out the Telrad and putting in Cambium solution. That was all in the part 90, the grandfathered wireless or grandfathered protection wireless zone. Over the course of several years, we deployed it to approximately 9 tower sites. And then earlier this year, we started the migration over to CBRS. Since then, we've gotten now at this point CBRS equipment on 11 of our 26 to 27 tower sites, however you count it. We've got a mixture of 450, 450i, and 450M APs deployed. As of right now, we have approximately 5 450Ms in the air, and then the rest are a combination of the 450 and 450i. As the slide mentions, we have hundreds of subscriber modules at this point. We've got approximately 440 CBRS devices deployed on the network. We're adding several every day at this point. It's really become kind of a tried and true solution for a number of reasons. One, distance. We can get subscribers out pretty far. We've got a couple of our tower sites with customers connected out as far as 24 miles, which just blows us away. Obviously, you don't want to connect subscribers on at that distance if you're trying to push the 50 to 100 megabit speeds, but we're able to get 20 to 30 megabit per second speeds at really low latencies out at that 20 to 24 mile mark, which is extremely impressive. We've been able to connect customers to these access points that we've never been able to serve before with our existing footprint without building new towers specifically for a couple households. Our entire network has been migrated to CBRS, or excuse me, our entire 3 gig network has been migrated to CBRS. We are using the federated SAS, and just in the last week, they essentially removed the restrictions from the grandfathered protection wireless zone to allow us to start registering some of our equipment in the upper portion of the band within CBRS. So I was able to successfully get some migrations done over this past week with that. As of right now, our busiest site on the network is the photos that you see mentioned here. This is actually at it's up on top of the ski resort here in Steamboat. So the Steamboat Springs Ski Resort. And we've got two 450Ms up on that tower it's actually about 95 subscribers spread between the two now. We keep adding more. With the demand, the increase in demand from folks working from home, from folks completing their schoolwork from home, I know we've seen essentially a 2 to 3x increase in demand over traditional years. And on our traditional 450 access points and 5 gigahertz, we're starting to see them maxing out at approximately 20 to 25 subscribers, sometimes even less, on the plans that we're selling. And one of the Medusas up on this tower site has 55 subscribers on it. And I know we've been watching it very closely thinking, hey, this thing is going to start tapping out before too long. But as Matt mentioned, we're seeing such an improvement in capacity on these Medusas that even at 55 subscribers on the one of them, we've still got what I would consider plenty of excess capacity left. We're hitting about 180 megabit per second on the throughput, and all of our link capacity tests and everything say that we can do between 250 and 300 with current with the essentially the connections that are on it right now. So we've been just really impressed with the equipment overall. Next slide. And so what has our experience been? As the slide mentions, it's been mostly good. We've not had a whole lot of struggle getting the equipment migrated over. We migrated approximately half of our access points and subscribers over to CBRS back in the March timeframe as we were preparing for the licenses to expire in April. And then we received news that the license expirations were extended until October. So we kept approximately half the equipment operating in CBRS, and we kept a number of access points operating in our grandfathered protection wireless zone spectrum. And as our licenses were starting to expire in the October 17th timeframe, we pushed to get the rest of the equipment migrated over. Now, because it did take a week or so before Federated updated the system, I did have to squeeze equipment that was in the grandfathered protection zone into the lower portion of the band, which admittedly did cause a little bit of crowding in the lower portion of the band. But as I mentioned, over the last week have been able to get some of that equipment put back into what was previously the grandfathered protection zone. So
Josh, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So a lot of these things that are listed here as struggles, I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, do you believe that they're kind of growing pains, things that are early on required some some tweaking, some less than optimal performance, the long time it took to register some of these things. Have we seen improvements in these as we've gone forward? Because from my standpoint, as a Cambium guy, I do see some things improving, especially from the software and how we're handling this, how we approach the registrations and the grants. And I just want to get your feedback on that. Is that something you're seeing as well? Things are getting better?
100%, 100%. Yeah. I would say that the improvements have been somewhat have been threefold. One of the improvements was the upgrades to CN Maestro and the improvements that have been made within the CN Maestro platform. I know just in the last, I'd say 3 weeks, we got migrated to the newest version of CN Maestro, which did offer a number of improvements regarding registering equipment. And the import spreadsheets that you guys are providing have become more intuitive over time. So that has really been helpful. I know originally with Federated, we could request an authorization of up to 45 EIRP, and with the updates, we've been able to push that up 1 dB up to 46. And the spreadsheet is also helping to calculate azimuth now, whereas early on it wasn't. I think one improvement would be if we could try to get that to help calculate down tilt. That would be helpful too. But that's been one of the things that I've noticed as a big improvement. The other thing is, on the early struggles, I mentioned here that the grant expirations were an issue, and we just in the last month was able to get our 3 gig equipment upgraded to 16.2.2, which helped with some grant expirations. And then just in this last week, I've gotten everything upgraded to 16.2.3, which offers even further improvements in the grant request cycle. I know for a number of months, equipment as it hit its grant expiration, in some cases would stop broadcasting for a period of time until it was able to successfully get a new grant. And now it seems that with the upgrades, once again, both in CN Maestro and on the equipment firmware, that doesn't seem to be much of an issue anymore. So that's been a big improvement. And then with the grandfather protection zone, getting those updates in the SAS, we're able to utilize essentially the entire band without very much crowding, without very much congestion.
As you mentioned, the October 17th deadline came and went, but there was a couple of bit of delay in getting those resolved because the FCC needed to update their database and then push that to the SASs. Then the SASs all needed to separately import those updates to the FCC database to remove those GPWZs from the kind of protection areas. So it took a little bit of time, but last week, I think all 3 of the SAS vendors have reported that they're now have removed the ones that have expired. So you're now free to use that 50 megahertz as needed in most areas. There are, again, some exceptions to that, and we can talk a little bit about that in the future. But there are most of the GPWZs that were slated to go away, have gone away, and have gone away in the system. So now that if you want to put one out, you can in that space. So Josh, what are you thinking for the future? What do you got cooking going forward for CBRS?
Well, we've actually got, because of the nature of our build season, we have to try to get all of the access points in the air before the snow really starts hunkering us down. So we've got quite a few CBRS access points broadcasting with as little as 0 to 3 subscribers connected to it. And so throughout this winter, we're going to be going through a lot of our 5 gig network that has reached some level of capacity limitations, even fully utilizing the 5.9 STA grants that we've received. We have a lot of our 5 gig APs that are just tapping out. And so we're going to go and start picking kind of cherry picking folks off the 5 gig network and moving them over to the 3 gig network. So that's going to help relieve a lot of capacity. We're also in the process of building a couple new towers just to the north of our current coverage area, and CBRS will be a big part of that expansion project. And in the coming years, we're hopeful that we are able to start actually moving over to a couple neighboring counties and expand in that direction. And once again, CBRS is going to be a big part of that growth, along with the upcoming 6 gigahertz stuff that's happening. We're hopeful that we can start getting into the 100+ megabit per second offerings with generally throughout our coverage area. So that's I think where we're planning on going as of right now.
Very good. Now I got one more question for you. Did Zirkle participate in the PAL auction at all?
We did. We won 4 PALs throughout our current coverage area and in 2 of our neighboring counties. And so we plan to either utilize those ourselves or participate in the secondary market in some fashion.
And you feel that even where you don't have PALs, that 80 megahertz that will stay available is pretty useful. I think that's what I'm hearing from you. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I know in portions of our network, we're pretty much utilizing the whole 150 megahertz as of right now. Now I know that other folks have won PALs in some of that, so we're going to have to jigger some things around, but I'm confident that we'll be able to do so efficiently. So,
cool. Well, very good. Thank you very much, Josh, for all that enlightening stuff about your network. It's good to get customer feedback directly and allow other folks that may be experiencing similar things or different things to kind of hear your story. So thanks again, Josh. At this point, yeah, I'd like to talk about what's coming up in CBRS, what has happened recently, and then what's to come, and Lucia will help me with that. Just to kind of set the table where we're at, commercial operations started back in April. We had a few hundred come on board in the April timeframe, many more in May. There was kind of that first wave that took advantage, the early adopters, if you will. They got on. Really the reason they were coming on is to take advantage of new spectrum at higher power. A lot of good things happened at that point. We saw kind of a lull in the June-July timeframe as folks, who early adopters got on and were operating, and then folks that were kind of biding their time or waiting to the deadline come and went. They were kind of holding off, and now in the last month or month and a half, we've seen a huge spike in the numbers, and there are now more than 50,000 subscribers operating in CBRS. Happily, things are happening, and so we're seeing that continue as folks are realizing that this deadline is really there. Let's get moving. Let's migrate the rest of our network over, because not a lot of folks got waivers. There are a few. So again, 85% of those licenses are now gone, no longer valid. Although there's a handful, there's probably 20 different customers, maybe 10 to 20 different customers that got extensions, some till December and some until February, to utilize that Part 90. And those GPWZs that are out there have been removed, as we talked about, from the SAS, so folks can use that upper 50 now. A lot of times that was hampering the folks that owned the GPWZs. They want to use it in Part 96, but couldn't because it was protected from themselves. A little bit awkward situation that's now resolved, and I think that was the case with Josh and Zirkle too, in some areas. So again, most of that stuff is resolved, and that's kind of where we stand today. Where are we headed? What are the next big things coming up? And I have a couple of kind of leading questions here that I'll let Lucia answer, but I'll kind of start her off by, let's talk about PALs, let's talk about coexistence groups, and then I know a lot of folks that using this band have been hit by what we call DPA events, and those are dynamic protection areas, and events occur when naval radar triggers the sensor network, and they kind of shut off certain frequencies from use, and that hits hard, and it hits unknowingly. There's no foretelling that it just happens and then your radios stop transmitting. Well, what can we do about that? So there's a couple of things here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lucia. And if you want to kind of walk through some of these things and tell us what we have to look forward to in CBRS.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. So definitely a lot of excitement, many things coming up. We're going to focus on these three upcoming features. Let's start with the Pulse. So Pulse support is one feature that's almost entirely supported by the SaaS vendor. There is very little, if anything, that our equipment needs to do differently to support PAL. You're going to see some small changes in the GUI, in the radio GUI, in the CNMaestro, just because the SaaS is now providing information on which channels are PALs. But besides that, everything that the radio needs to operate in a PAL channel, it's already in there in the software. Some of you have won PAL licenses, like Josh was mentioning. The one piece that's missing is the frequency assignment. So you know how many channels you have won in which county, but you don't know yet which one is your frequency. That's going to be the first step in this whole PAL support feature. You're going to receive more detailed information from your SaaS vendor, but high level, we want to give you some information. The first step is going to be for the operators to provide input on which channels they would like to use. So the algorithm is going to take as input your recommendation. After all the operators have provided inputs, the algorithm is going to run and is going to try to make everybody happy to see if all the recommendations can be honored. If not, it's going to try to do the best in the ecosystem to honor all the requests. At that point, the channel assignment is published, and there is going to be a period of time where operators are going to be allowed to swap channels if they want to do it. After that, then the channel assignment is frozen, and then you're going to know which one is your channel. All this is going to take between November and December, and the expectation is by the end of December, the channel assignment is going to be final. The actual PAL support happens in the January-February timeframe. The indication we've seen from the SaaSes is by February 1st, all of them plan on having full support. Depending on the SaaS, one SaaS may decide to support all the counties in the country the same day, or they may decide to do a group of counties over multiple days. You're going to receive the exact schedule of your county by your SaaS provider. The strategy to protect the devices in these areas is different according to the SaaS vendor. We see two different strategies. There is going to be some SaaSes that require the operator to go into the SaaS portal and indicate which devices they want to protect in which channel. So the way it works is once you know what your channel is, you know the county, you're going to go into the SaaS portal, you're going to indicate which devices you want to protect on that channel, and the SaaS is going to create a contour, a protection contour, where only those devices are protected in that area. This calculation takes a few hours, so you go in ahead of time. Once the calculation is done, then you're allowed to ask for a grant on that channel, and then you're fully protected, meaning that nobody else can use the channel in your area. But it does require that manual intervention from the operator to indicate which devices you want protected. We see other SaaSes are going with a different strategy. They don't require any manual input from the operator. When a device registers and asks for a grant, they can detect if they are in your county in the channel that you own as a PAL, and they take the grant request as an implicit request to add the device to the PAL protection area. So nothing is needed ahead of time. When the device registers and asks for a grant, it gets authorized right away. It still needs some time, they say a few hours, to do all the calculations for full protection. So if there are other devices in the area that need to vacate the channel, that may take a few hours, but your device is allowed to operate right away. So again, because the SaaSes are using different strategies, they're going to provide information directly to you on what's needed on your end to support the PALs in your county. All of this we have discussed is pertinent to the operators who won the PAL licenses. But like we were mentioning before, this topic is very important also if today you're operating as a GAA in some of these channels. If the SaaSes say on February 1st, we're going to fully support the PAL feature, it doesn't mean that by February 1st, you need to vacate all the channels. You are allowed to operate as long as the PAL owner doesn't claim their channel. That being said, if you know in your county these channels have been won by somebody else, you can expect eventually they're going to claim it, even if it's not on day one, but for sure at one point they're going to claim their PAL channel. So it may be worth for you to start looking into it and see which channels will be available after that, and possibly do a frequency replanning ahead of time, even if you don't have to do it right away. Clearly, if you start thinking about it, that's going to be helpful for you. The second topic we want to cover is coexistence. Now, this is a feature we've all been waiting for, but unfortunately, the SaaS vendors are pushing this out in their roadmap, and it's going to take a while before it's fully supported. Ideally, what we want to see when everything is said and done is the SaaS to do the full calculations and do the channel assignment and enforce the channel assignment so that they can guarantee that there is no interference. Now, we're not there yet. There is only one SaaS vendor that's starting now to support what we call phase 1 of coexistence, because it provides some guidance, even if there is no enforcement yet. That's why we talk about phase 1. There is going to be more later when the actual enforcement happens. So what does it mean for you? First of all, the coexistence parameters are going to be supported starting with this SaaS vendor and eventually by all of them. There are 2 coexistence parameters, and unfortunately the terminology is confusing because there is a set of terms in WinForum and other in CBRS Alliance. So we are trying to, explain everything to you. We'll give definitely more details and indicate exactly what you need to do. The first of the 2 parameters in the WinForum terminology is called Principal Subordinate Single Frequency Group. And in the CBRS Alliance terminology is the CCG, is the Common Channel Group. In the Radio GUI and in CN Maestro, we are going to call this coax sector ID. We are hoping that this is a clearer terminology because these are devices that must be on the same channel. So for our use case, it's one access point and all the subscribers connected to it. So essentially one sector. This parameter is going to default to the MAC address of the AP. In a normal scenario, you don't have to change this. It's going to be editable in case you need to do something special with your network. But in 99% of the cases, you don't have to worry about this. We default it for you. You never have to change it. The second parameter in the WinForum terminology is called spectrum reuse. And in the CBRS Alliance terminology is called ICG, Interference Coordination Group. We're going to call this coax spectrum reuse ID. This is the group of devices that can be on the same channel, but they don't have to be on the same channel. For example, you're deploying 2 sectors back to back. Typically, you reuse the same frequency, so they can be on the same frequency, but it's also okay if they are not. This is a parameter that you are going to have to configure. You can leave it blank, nothing bad happens. The same thing as today, essentially the SaaS is not going to have this information. But if you do provide it, then the SaaS is going to have more information for their calculations. The way you're going to use this, you're going to do your frequency planning the same way you do today, but instead of assigning a specific frequency to each sector, you're going to assign this coexistence parameter, this coax spectrum reuse ID, to a group of sectors that can be on the same channel. Then what happens when you provide these parameters? They are provided in the registration request message and they can be updated later on. So you can always change your mind and make a change later. Now, like I said, in the near future, only one of the SaaSes is going to take these parameters. The other SaaSes don't even accept them. But once we introduce the feature in CN Maestro, we are going to allow you to provide the parameters regardless of the SaaS you're connected to, and we are going to collect all the data. If your SaaS is going to support this feature in 3, 6, 9 months, you're going to have all the data already there, and we can help you to just provide it as a file dump to the SaaS, so you don't have to go back later and add all these parameters in all the devices. So it's still beneficial for you to understand how this works, even if today you won't see an immediate benefit if your SaaS provider doesn't support it. After you provide the parameters, what happens in the SaaS? The difference is that when you perform a spectrum inquiry request, the spectrum inquiry response is going to have sorted a sorted response. Essentially, it's going to provide some recommendations on which channels you should use. This is very helpful because now you can pick the channel that the SAS recommends. This is going to help in the ecosystem. But to be clear, nothing is enforced. You can look at the results, you can see which channels are recommended, but if you see another channel that's available, you can still send a grant request on the other channel, and the SAS, as long as it's available, is still going to give you a grant on the channel. So interference, unfortunately, is still possible. So just something for you to understand. This is just a recommendation, is not an enforcement. The last topic we want to cover is the DPA activation. This is another feature that eventually all the SaaS vendors are going to support, but it's not coming fast enough. It's not coming in the near future. So what happens, like Matt mentioned, if a DPA activates and you have a grant in a specific channel that gets activated, your grant is suspended. And today, the device keeps heartbeating the suspended grant. Essentially, it's an outage until the grant is authorized again. Once the SaaSes are going to support this feature, what happens is if another channel is available, the SaaS is going to give you an alternate channel to use while your primary channel is suspended. And then eventually you can go back operating on the original channel. So the idea is not to be off the air, but to provide some functionalities. Now the alternate channel could have a smaller bandwidth or could have lower EIRP, but still you can have some operation while you wait for the DPA to deactivate. Now, because this feature is not coming in the near future, then inside the device, we are trying to add some smarts in order to cover this case. Essentially, what happens is when once the feature is fully supported, when the DPA hits and your grant is suspended, the first thing the device is going to check is if your entire channel was suspended or only a portion of it. It's possible if you're operating on a wider channel, 30 or 40 megahertz, that only 10 or 20 is suspended and the remaining portion is still authorized. So in that case, the device is going to continue using the portion of the spectrum that wasn't hit by the DPA activation. And in this way, you can keep operating. Of course, the throughput is going to suffer because now you have a smaller channel bandwidth. But again, the idea is not to be off the air and to be able to continue operation. If there is nothing left in your channel, then the device is going to try to look for something else. Looking for something else is going to perform a spectrum inquiry and get information from the SAS. This is also where your coexistence parameters come into play if you have provided them, because when the SAS gives recommendations, it can take that into account. When the device sees which channels are available, then it's going to start looking for some options. At first, it's going to try to look for a channel with the same bandwidth that you're currently using. If that's not available, it's going to try something with a smaller bandwidth, again, in the spirit of trying to keep the connection going and get some functionality there. Now, the spectrum inquiry response provides definitely guidance. There is going to be some cases in which the channels look available, but they are not. And I'm going to give you two quick examples. One is if the DPA activated, today the SaaSes are not allowed to indicate that that channel is unavailable. This may change in the future, but it's for security purposes so that you don't know that that channel activated, essentially detected the radar activity. So the channel may look available, the radio may try to get that channel, but then it will be suspended. The grant will not be authorized. Another scenario is going back to the PAL. If you have a PAL channel that looks available in the spectrum inquiry response, and the radio may try to use that channel, but if your SAS requires you to go in the portal and add the device in the protection area, if you haven't done that, then the grant is not authorized. So that's another scenario where the spectrum inquiry response may have some information that may not be fully correct or usable, if you wish. That's why the device needs to keep searching for a new channel. So all of this is coming up in the next few months. As one final remark, I just want to go back to what Josh was saying about upgrading CNMaster and upgrading the radio software. We have a lot of new features and improvements every release. So we strongly recommend that you do upgrade as often as you can, because with every new release, we are making all these features better. And then it's worth for you to keep up with both the releases on the CNMaster side and on the radio side.
Well, thanks, Lucia. I think that each of these topics could and will be a separate webinar in the future. This was kind of a preview, a lot of information there, a lot of good information. And I just want to say that this is not the last time you'll hear about these things. We'll have some more detail, and we'll have a lot more detail in the forums as we get more close to implementing some of these things, and a lot more information, and from our partners as well. Other information that you can find, we have a ton of information out there, and at this point I'd like to encourage you to ask questions. There's only a couple, and I'll get to those in just a second. There's only a couple so far, but we do have a ton of information available on our forum. We have a consolidated guide that goes through step by step how to get started with CBRS, and it'll lead you through all of the steps required. And we also have a fair number of YouTube videos. The best thing is to subscribe to the Cambium Network's YouTube channel, and then select the lists, the playlists that are focused on WISPs. That'll lead you to a lot of these CBRS centric stuff. So with that, let me start walking through some of the questions. I don't have a lot, but feel free to keep typing them in. The first question is really, as a provider, this whole notion of having to pay somebody to use Spectrum is kind of foreign and not welcome. It's not a charge that Cambium's imposing. It's a charge that is required to operate the networks that'll do all of these cool things that Lucia talked about, with coexistence, with management of the PALs, with protecting the incumbents. The only reason that the FCC was able to open up an extra 100 megahertz of spectrum is with this agreement in place. And so these SaaS vendors are doing their job, and they need to be paid for it, because it takes a lot of equipment, a lot of calculations, a lot of server space to do the management and coordination that's required to allow this 100 megahertz to be used. And so it's hard to look at it as a tax for an unnecessary thing. It's really not. It's really an advantage that we're gaining by allowing a new set of 100 megahertz of spectrum to be used, whereas it wouldn't otherwise be able to be used. And it's at higher power, and it's coordinated. So there's a lot of benefits for that money. Yes, it's a cost. It's a monthly cost. I get it, but it's providing you with something. There's a value to it. If you don't want to use the spectrum, I totally respect and understand that. But to use the spectrum, this is a required payment that's required because of all of the work that goes into managing it and allowing it to become available. So that's my answer to the tax question. So a couple of very nice comments for our support team, and thank you for that. They appreciate it. There's a number of our support staff that work 24 hours a day on this stuff and focus on CBRS. And if you ever have to talk to them, it's a great experience. They're trained up really well. We have a couple of folks that are very much, this is their expertise, and they're there to help customers get going in CBRS. So that's great. Question about a website to search for PALs in given counties. Yeah, the FCC actually has the results of the auction, and you can search by county. I can post that in the forum under this webinar. When I post this webinar recording, I'll post the link to the FCC auction results website. You can see kind of how much they went for, if that's of interest to you, but also you can search by county and see who won those PALs. Now, the PALs are not assigned by channel yet, and that's what part of what Lucia talked about. They're not assigned by channel yet, but they're certainly the number of PALs that were auctioned off in that county and who won them is listed. So you can definitely see that. It's public information. And that's pretty much the only questions. I thought there would be a lot more. But I do want to say also that there is another webinar today at 1 o'clock Central Time in about, 3 hours. We're going to have kind of an open forum, if you will, and you can feel free to join us. We're not going to have slides. We're not going to be talking about anything specific, but it's a kind of an Ask the Experts. I'm going to have Lucia again. I'm going to have our Tier 3 support guys. I'm going to have another system architect, Dave Geithner, join us to talk about anything and everything CBRS. You're free to ask any questions you want. It's a great opportunity to get questions asked, and we'll go into whatever detail is required. We'll share screens, we'll walk through tools, onboarding, changing frequencies, whatever you need to talk about, feel free to come and ask that. There is a good question that just popped up that I thought would be asked first, actually. There's another auction coming up in December, and it's called the C-band auction. That has to do with 3 points. It's actually 3.7 to 3.98. And you had to have registered for that already and put your hat in the ring to bid on that. The bidding starts in December. Those are for 20 megahertz channels, specific 20 megahertz channels in a given partial economic area, which is much larger than a county. So the expectation is that those will be very expensive in highly populated areas, but there may be some very rural areas where some service providers may have an opportunity to bid on them. So a couple of points there. Number one is that the 450 equipment, the 450M and 450B specifically, does operate or can operate all the way up to 3.9 with very little. It starts degrading service, link budgets start degrading a little bit as you approach that 3.9. And we're characterizing that from all the way from 3900 to 3980 to see if it's usable at all and how bad it gets as you get up that high. And we'll publish the results of that as we get information, but that's coming in the next month or so. And we're also evaluating what can we do to support higher frequencies with the given hardware, and if it requires hardware changes, what can we do in the near future? But that is an important point. You can utilize 450 gear from 3.7 to 3.9 today. If you do happen to buy and purchase a license for one of these channels. Granted, you probably, if you're in the bidding, aim for a lower channel. You're better off from a usability standpoint for 450 specifically. Now, I will say also that band, the C band, supports power levels of, I think it's 3,980 watts. We don't get to that power level. However, you can use it just like you use it in CBRS. It will function the same way. Meaning it'll provide power enough to reach customers as Josh mentioned, he's getting customers about 20 miles away. You can do the same thing you do in CBRS with that, and it's a licensed channel, so there should not be interference. It might even perform a little better. So that's pretty much all I have on the C-band stuff. If you have further questions on that, feel free. Again, I'm going to post this in the forums, and we'll take it from there. With that, we're about at the top of the hour. I don't want to keep anyone too long, but thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it. And again, we'll post this in the forum and speak to you there. Thanks again. Bye-bye.